The sun had barely crested the rugged peaks of the Montana Territory when Emma Hawkins spotted the trail of dust in the distance, her heart sinking with dread. Not another bounty hunter. Not today. She adjusted her worn leather satchel, quickening her pace toward the Silver Peak General Store, desperate to complete her errands before whoever was riding in made it to town. It was 1876, 3 years since Emma had fled Boston and her arranged marriage to a banker 30 years her senior. At 22, she had built a life for herself in Silver Peak, Montana, working as a schoolteacher and seamstress. A life that would be threatened if her father ever discovered her whereabouts. The dust cloud grew larger, and Emma ducked into the alleyway between the general store and the saloon. Through the narrow gap, she watched as a single rider materialized from the haze. He sat tall in the saddle, his broad shoulders silhouetted against the morning light. This was no bounty hunter sent by her father, at least not the typical kind. The stranger's hat was pulled low, but she could make out a strong jawline peppered with stubble. A Winchester rifle was secured to his saddle, and even from this distance, she could tell his clothes were travel-worn. The man dismounted with an easy grace that suggested a lifetime in the saddle. He patted his horse's neck, a magnificent chestnut Mustang, before securing it to the hitching post outside the sheriff's office. Emma exhaled. Whatever business he had, it wasn't with her. She stepped out from the alley and continued toward the general store, only to collide with a solid wall of muscle and leather. "Pardon me, madam," came a deep voice tinged with a southern drawl. Emma looked up further than she expected into the most startling blue eyes she'd ever seen. The stranger from the trail stood before her, hat now in hand, revealing thick dark hair that curled slightly at the ends. "The fault is mine," she managed, stepping back, noticing the star pinned to his vest. "A lawman. I wasn't watching where I was going." He smiled and something fluttered in Emma's chest. "Name's Xavier," he said. "Just arrived as the new marshal for Silver Peak." Emma's mouth went dry. A new marshal meant new scrutiny, new questions about everyone in town, questions she couldn't afford to answer. "Emma Hawkins," she replied, offering her hand before she could think better of it. "I'm the schoolteacher here." His hand enveloped hers, calloused but gentle. "Pleasure to meet you, Miss Hawkins. I'm sure I'll be seeing you around town." "Yes, I suppose you will," she said, pulling her hand away. "Welcome to Silver Peak, Marshal Xavier." She hurried into the store, feeling his eyes on her back long after the door closed behind her. The general store was mercifully empty save for old Mr. Jenkins behind the counter. Emma handed him her list of supplies: thread, flour, coffee, and a few penny candies for her students. "Saw you talking to the new marshal," Jenkins said, his rheumy eyes twinkling. "Handsome fella, ain't he?" Emma busied herself counting coins from her purse. "I hadn't noticed," Jenkins chuckled. "Course not. Just like you haven't noticed half the eligible men in town making fools of themselves every Sunday trying to sit next to you at church." "Mr. Jenkins, really," Emma protested, feeling heat rise to her cheeks. "All I'm saying is a pretty young woman like yourself shouldn't be alone in these parts. Gets dangerous out here." Emma knew that better than most. "I manage just fine on my own." Jenkins shook his head, gathering her supplies. "Stubborn as a mule, just like your mare." The bell over the door jangled, and Emma turned to see Marshal Xavier enter, ducking his head slightly to clear the doorframe. "Morning," he nodded to Jenkins before turning those blue eyes on Emma again. "Miss Hawkins." "Marshal," she acknowledged, accepting her parcels from Jenkins and tucking them into her satchel. "If you don't mind my asking," Hayes said, removing his hat again, "where might I find decent lodging in town? Sheriff's office has a cot, but I'm hoping for something a bit more permanent." Jenkins perked up. Mrs. Holloway runs a fine boarding house just past the schoolhouse. Best cooking in 3 counties. Mrs. Holloway's is lovely, Emma agreed reluctantly, though rather full at present with the railroad surveyors in town. Actually, Jenkins interjected, they pulled out yesterday. Whole place should be empty now. Emma bit her lip. Mrs. Holloway's boarding house was directly across from her own small cabin on the edge of town. The last thing she needed was a lawman as her neighbor. Much obliged for the information, Hayes said, his gaze lingering on Emma. I'll head there after I get settled at the office. Miss Hawkins, might I trouble you to point me in the direction of the schoolhouse? I'd like to get my bearings. It's on Willow Street, can't miss it, she said quickly. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have lessons to prepare. Emma hurried out, the back of her neck prickling with awareness. Something about Xavier unsettled her, and it wasn't just his badge. It was the way he looked at her, like he could see right through the carefully constructed life she'd built in Silver Peak. By late afternoon, Emma had finished her preparations for the next day's lessons and headed toward her small cabin. The sunset painted the mountains in shades of gold and purple, and for a moment she paused to take in the beauty of it. This was why she had chosen Silver Peak, surrounded by wilderness, far from Boston society and her father's controlling grasp. As she rounded the corner past the church, she saw a familiar figure on Mrs. Holloway's porch. Xavier, deep in conversation with the landlady. Mrs. Holloway was gesturing animatedly, clearly delighted with her new tenant. When the older woman spotted Emma, she waved enthusiastically. Emma, dear, come meet our new marshal properly. Emma reluctantly crossed the dusty street, her satchel heavy on her shoulder. We've already met, Mrs. Holloway. Well, I was just telling the marshal about our little community. Did you know he tracked down the Colton gang in Colorado? 5 men all by himself. Mrs. Holloway beamed. Hayes shifted uncomfortably. It wasn't quite like that, madam. Don't be modest, Mrs. Holloway insisted. We're lucky to have a man of your caliber here in Silver Peak. Emma studied him with new wariness. A man capable of tracking down wanted outlaws might be equally skilled at finding a woman who didn't want to be found. Will you be joining us for supper, Emma? Mrs. Holloway asked. I'm making my special chicken and dumplings to welcome the marshal. Thank you, but I have plans, Emma lied. Another time, perhaps. Hayes was watching her again, his expression unreadable. Perhaps Miss Hawkins could show me around town tomorrow. I'd appreciate a local guide. Before Emma could formulate a polite refusal, Mrs. Holloway clapped her hands. What a wonderful idea. Emma knows every inch of Silver Peak. Trapped, Emma forced a smile. I teach until 3. After that, I could spare an hour. I'll meet you at the schoolhouse, Hayes said, tipping his hat. Much obliged. Emma nodded and continued to her cabin, her mind racing. 1 hour. She could manage 1 hour without revealing anything damaging about her past. Then she would make her excuses and ensure their paths crossed as little as possible thereafter. The next morning dawned clear and cold. Emma arrived at the schoolhouse early, lighting the stove to warm the room before her students arrived. She had hardly slept, her dreams plagued by images of her father's men dragging her back to Boston in chains. The day passed in a blur of arithmetic lessons and reading primers. When the last child had departed, clutching a newly mended slate, Emma sat at her desk and waited, both dreading and curious about the hour to come. At precisely 3 o'clock, a knock sounded at the schoolhouse door. Xavier stood on the threshold, hat in hand, looking impossibly tall against the backdrop of children's drawings pinned to the wall. Right on time, Marshal, Emma said, gathering her shawl. Hayes, he corrected. When I'm not officially on duty, I'd prefer Hayes. Emma nodded, not committing to the familiarity. Where would you like to start? wherever you think best. I've already seen the main street and the sheriff's office." They walked in silence for a moment, Emma leading him toward the church at the edge of town. "How long have you been in Silver Peak?" Hayes asked. 3 years this spring," she replied carefully. "And before that?" Emma's step faltered slightly. "Back east." Hayes nodded, not pressing further, which surprised her. Most people immediately asked which state, which town. "I was in Texas," he volunteered. "Then Colorado, followed the law where it took me." "And now it's brought you here," Emma said. "Silver Peak must seem very small after those places." "Small can be good," Hayes said, his voice softening. "Peaceful." They reached the church, a simple white structure with a steeple that gleamed in the afternoon light. "This is the heart of town, really," Emma explained. "Sunday services, socials, town meetings, everything happens here." Hayes examined the building with appreciation. Solid construction. Beautiful woodwork. "The men built it together when the town was first settled," Emma said, warming to her subject despite herself. "My friend Clara's father was a master carpenter. He did all the detail work inside." They continued walking, Emma pointing out the doctor's house, the small newspaper office, and the blacksmith's forge. Hayes listened attentively, asking thoughtful questions about the town and its residents. As they passed the livery stable, a young boy came running toward them, his face streaked with tears. "Miss Hawkins, Miss Hawkins," he cried. "Pa says you gotta come quick. Ma's having the baby and something's wrong." Emma recognized Tommy Wilson, one of her students. His mother was expecting her 6th child, and the family lived on a small homestead about a mile outside of town. "Tommy, this is Marshal Xavier," Emma said quickly. "Marshal, the Wilson farm is just past the creek. Would you mind fetching Dr. Green while I go ahead with Tommy?" Hayes's expression turned serious. "I'll do better than that. My horse is at the livery. I'll take you to the Wilson place and we can send Tommy for the doctor. He'll get there faster on a fresh horse than on foot." Emma hesitated only a moment before nodding. "You're right. Come along, Tommy." Within minutes, Hayes had saddled his chestnut and helped Emma mount behind him. Tommy was placed on a sturdy mare with clear instructions to bring the doctor straight to the farm. Emma held tentatively to Hayes's waist as they galloped out of town, the wind whipping her hair loose from its pins. She could feel the solid strength of him, the steady rhythm of his breathing even as they raced over the uneven ground. They reached the Wilson homestead in record time. Emma slid from the horse before Hayes could help her and hurried inside the small cabin, where Sarah Wilson lay moaning on the bed, her husband Daniel pacing anxiously nearby. "Thank the Lord you're here," Daniel said, his face pale. "She's been in pain since dawn, but nothing's happening." The other ones came so easy. "It's all right, Daniel," Emma said with more confidence than she felt. "The doctor's on his way. I'll see what I can do until then." She had assisted at births before. It was often the schoolteacher's lot in small towns to help wherever needed, but she was no midwife. Still, she rolled up her sleeves and set to work, examining Sarah as best she could. "The baby's turned wrong," she said quietly to Hayes, who hovered in the doorway. "We need the doctor." Hayes nodded grimly. "I'll wait outside for him." The next 2 hours were among the longest of Emma's life. Dr. Green arrived and confirmed her suspicion the baby was breech. With calm efficiency, he worked to turn the infant while Emma wiped Sarah's brow and whispered encouragements. Outside, Hayes had taken charge of the 5 Wilson children, distracting them with stories and whittling small animals from scraps of wood Daniel provided. When the lusty cry of a newborn finally filled the cabin, Emma sagged with relief. "Doctor." Green placed the squalling infant boy in Sarah's arms, his own face weary but triumphant. "You did well, Miss Hawkins," he said to Emma. Your quick thinking likely saved both mother and child. Emma shook her head. It was Marshal Xavier who got us here so quickly. She stepped outside, exhausted but happy. The sun was setting, painting the sky in brilliant orange and pink. Hayes sat on a log surrounded by the Wilson children, finishing a tiny wooden horse. "A boy," Emma announced. "Everyone is fine." The children cheered and rushed past her into the cabin to see their new brother. Hayes stood, pocketing his knife. "You were remarkable in there," he said quietly. Emma brushed a stray lock of hair from her face, suddenly aware of her disheveled appearance. "I only did what anyone would do." "Not anyone," Hayes insisted. "You kept your head in a crisis. That's rare." Their eyes met, and for a moment, Emma forgot all her reservations about the new marshal. She saw only a man who had ridden hard to help a family in need, who had kept 5 frightened children occupied while their mother fought for her life. "We should get back to town," she said finally, breaking the spell. "It'll be dark soon." The ride back was slower, more peaceful. Emma, too tired to maintain her usual vigilance, leaned against Hayes's broad back, drawing comfort from his warmth in the cooling evening air. "Thank you," she murmured, "for today." She felt rather than heard his chuckle. "Should be me thanking you. Best town tour I've ever had." When they reached Silver Peak, lights were already glowing in the windows of homes and businesses. Hayes helped Emma down from his horse outside her cabin, his hands strong and steady at her waist. "I'll see you safely inside," he said, tying the horse to her porch rail. Too weary to argue, Emma unlocked her door and allowed him to check the small cabin before bidding him good night. As she closed the door, she caught a final glimpse of his face, concerned, gentle, and something else she couldn't quite name. For the first time since his arrival, Emma slept deeply, without dreams of pursuit or capture. The next weeks brought a shift in Emma's carefully ordered life. Hayes Xavier proved to be a quiet but constant presence in Silver Peak. He established regular patrols, intervened diplomatically in a boundary dispute between 2 ranchers, and even organized the town's young men into a volunteer fire brigade after a close call at the newspaper office. To Emma's surprise, he never asked probing questions about her past, though she often caught him watching her with thoughtful eyes. Gradually, her wariness began to thaw. They fell into an unexpected pattern. Hayes would appear at the schoolhouse after lessons, sometimes bearing a wildflower or an interesting rock he'd found on patrol. They would walk through town together, discussing books. He was surprisingly well-read for a lawman, local gossip, or the progress of her students. Emma found herself looking forward to these walks, to Hayes's wry observations and the sound of his deep laugh. When she told him about her plans to expand the school library, he donated 3 books from his own small collection, a volume of Shakespeare's sonnets, a history of the American frontier, and a dog-eared copy of The Last of the Mohicans. "These were my mother's," he explained, handing them to Emma one crisp October afternoon. "She taught me to read before I was 5. Said education was the only thing no one could take from you." Emma ran her fingers over the worn leather bindings. "These are too precious to give away." Hayes shook his head. "They belong in a library. Mother would have liked knowing they were being used to teach children." "Would have?" Emma asked gently. "She passed 10 years ago, influenza." Emma touched his arm briefly. "I'm sorry, she sounds like a remarkable woman." "She was," Hayes agreed, his eyes distant. Then he seemed to shake off the memory. "Speaking of remarkable women, Mrs. Holloway mentioned there's a harvest dance this Saturday at the church. Will you be attending?" Emma blinked at the sudden change of subject. Yes, I suppose I will." "I'm helping with the decorations." "Would you consider saving a dance for me?" Hayes asked, his usual confidence giving way to something almost shy. Emma felt a flutter of panic mixed with an unfamiliar excitement. A dance was public, social, the very thing she had avoided since coming to Silver Peak. Yet the thought of turning him down made her heart sink. "I would be honored, Marshal," she said finally. His smile was like the sun breaking through clouds. "Hayes," he corrected, as he always did. "I'll look forward to it, Emma." It was the first time he had used her given name, and the sound of it in his deep voice followed her all the way home. Saturday arrived clear and cool, perfect weather for the harvest celebration. The church had been transformed with autumn leaves, golden wheat sheaves, and dozens of candles. Long tables groaned under the weight of pies, cakes, and savory dishes brought by every family in town. Emma wore her best dress forest green wool with a lace collar and had spent extra time arranging her auburn hair in a becoming style. As she helped Mrs. Holloway arrange the last of the food, she couldn't help glancing toward the door every few minutes. "He'll be here, Mrs. Holloway said knowingly, following Emma's gaze. "Man hasn't taken his eyes off you for weeks." "I don't know what you mean," Emma protested, but her cheeks warmed. "Of course you don't," the older woman smiled. "Just like you don't know Walter Jenkins has had his heart set on you since you arrived, or that young Dr. Green asks after your health every time I see him." "Mrs. Holloway, really? All I'm saying is, there's a difference between the way those men look at you and the way our Marshal does. Mark my words." Before Emma could formulate a response, the church door opened, and Hayes stepped inside. He had traded his usual dusty trail clothes for a clean dark suit that emphasized the breadth of his shoulders. His hair was neatly combed, though one rebellious lock already curled over his forehead. His eyes found Emma immediately, and the smile that spread across his face made her breath catch. "If you'll excuse me, Mrs. Holloway," Emma murmured, smoothing her skirts as she moved toward him. Hayes met her halfway across the room. "Miss Hawkins," he said formally, though his eyes danced, "you look beautiful tonight." "Thank you, Marshal," she replied, matching his tone but unable to suppress a smile. "You clean up rather well yourself." The fiddlers struck up a lively reel and couples began to form sets for the dance. Hayes offered his arm. "Shall we?" Emma placed her hand on his sleeve, feeling the solid muscle beneath the wool. "Lead the way." For all his size, Hayes moved with surprising grace. He guided Emma through the intricate patterns of the dance, his hand warm and sure at her waist during the turns. When the music ended, they were both slightly breathless. "Another?" he asked hopefully. Emma nodded, unable to deny herself the pleasure of his company. They danced 3 more sets before Emma begged a rest, her feet protesting despite her enjoyment. Hayes fetched them both cups of cider and led her to a quiet corner. "I've been meaning to ask," he said, watching her over the rim of his cup. "How did a Boston lady end up teaching school in Silver Peak?" Emma nearly choked on her cider. "What makes you think I'm from Boston?" Hayes's expression remained gentle, but his eyes were shrewd. "Your accent slips sometimes when you're tired or excited, and you mentioned Symphony Hall last week when we were discussing music that's in Boston." Emma set down her cup, her enjoyment of the evening evaporating. "You've been investigating me." "No," Hayes said quickly. "Just observing." "It's an occupational hazard." He hesitated. "Emma, if you're in some kind of trouble, I'm not," she cut him off. "I simply preferred a different life than the one laid out for me in Boston." Hayes studied her face. "Fair enough, we all have our reasons for ending up where we do." The music started again, a slower waltz this time. Hayes held out his hand, his expression hopeful. "One more dance before I promise to stop asking questions." Emma hesitated, then placed her hand in his. "You are incorrigible, Marshal Xavier." His smile returned. "So I've been told." The waltz brought them closer together. Hayes's hand resting lightly on the small of her back. Emma was acutely aware of their proximity, of the clean scent of soap and leather that clung to him. "Whatever brought you to Silver Peak," Hayes said quietly, his breath stirring the hair near her temple, "I'm grateful for it." Emma looked up at him, startled by the sincerity in his voice. "Are you?" "More than I can say." The intensity in his blue eyes made her heart race. For a moment, Emma thought he might kiss her, right there in the middle of the harvest dance with all of Silver Peak watching. Part of her, a part she hardly recognized, hoped he would. Instead, Hayes stepped back as the music ended, though he kept hold of her hand. "Would you like to step outside for some air? It's getting rather warm in here." Emma nodded, and he led her through the crowd toward the church door. Outside, the night was crisp and clear, stars blazing overhead in a velvet sky. A few other couples strolled nearby, seeking relief from the stuffy church hall. They walked in companionable silence to a bench beneath an old oak tree. Hayes draped his jacket around Emma's shoulders when he noticed her shiver. "Tell me something true," he said after they'd sat for a moment. "Something not about Boston or why you left. Something about you here and now." Emma considered his request. "I love teaching," she said finally. "When I came here, it was just a way to support myself, but now I can't imagine doing anything else." Watching a child's face when they finally understand something new, it's like witnessing a small miracle. Hayes smiled. "I can see that about you. You have a way of explaining things that makes them clear without making a person feel foolish for not knowing." "Is that how I make you feel?" Emma teased. "You make me feel a great many things, Emma Hawkins," Hayes said softly. "Foolish is occasionally one of them, but not in the way you mean." Before Emma could respond, a commotion erupted from the direction of the church. Raised voices and the sound of breaking glass shattered the peaceful night. Hayes was on his feet instantly, his relaxed demeanor replaced by alert tension. "Stay here," he ordered, striding toward the disturbance. Emma ignored his instruction, following a few paces behind. Outside the church, they found 3 cowboys from the Double Bar Ranch engaged in a heated argument with several local men. One of the cowboys, clearly drunk, was brandishing a broken bottle. "That's far enough, gentlemen." Hayes's voice cut through the shouting, calm but authoritative. "What seems to be the problem here?" The tallest cowboy, his face flushed with whiskey and anger, turned toward Hayes. "Ain't no problem, Marshal, lest these town boys make one. We just came for the dancing." "You came to make trouble," countered Walter Jenkins, the general store owner's son. "And to harass our ladies." Hayes stepped between the two groups. "The dance is a town event and everyone's welcome provided they behave civilly. Have you men been drinking?" the cowboy with the bottle sneered. "What if we have? Ain't no law against a man having a drink." "There is when he brings that drink to a church social and threatens folks with broken glass," Hayes replied evenly. "I'm going to have to ask you boys to head back to your ranch for tonight." "And if we don't?" challenged the tall one. Quick as lightning, Hayes's hand dropped to his holster. He didn't draw his weapon, but the message was clear. "Then I'll escort you to the jail until you sober up. Your choice, gentlemen." The cowboys exchanged glances, weighing their chances. After a tense moment, the tall one spat into the dirt. "Ain't worth the trouble. Come on, boys." They slouched off toward their horses tied at the hitching post. Hayes watched them go, his posture relaxed but vigilant. "Marshal," Walter Jenkins began, "those men insulted Miss Clara Robinson most grievously." "They shouldn't be allowed. I'll speak with their foreman tomorrow," Hayes assured him. "For now, let's get back to the celebration. No need to let a few troublemakers ruin the evening for everyone." The crowd dispersed, returning to the warmth and music inside. Hayes turned to find Emma still standing behind him, his jacket clutched around her shoulders. "I thought I asked you to stay put," he said, though there was no real anger in his voice. "I was concerned," Emma replied simply. Hayes's expression softened. "The West can be a rough place, Emma. Men like that, they don't always respond to reason." "You handled it well," she said. "You didn't escalate the situation or humiliate them, even though they deserved it." "Violence begets violence," Hayes said, offering his arm to escort her back inside. "I learned that lesson the hard way." Emma wanted to ask what he meant, but they had reached the church door. The moment for confidences had passed. Instead, she returned his jacket with a grateful smile. "Thank you for the dances, Marshal, and the conversation." Hayes caught her hand as she turned to go. "Does this mean our walk tomorrow is canceled?" Emma hesitated. Every instinct for self-preservation told her to pull away, to rebuild the careful distance she had maintained from everyone in Silver Peak for 3 years. Yet when she looked into Hayes's face, she saw something that made those instincts falter. "3 o'clock," she said. "As always." His smile was worth the risk. The following week brought an unseasonable warm spell to Silver Peak. Emma took advantage of the weather to hold lessons outdoors, teaching her students about local plants and wildlife as they explored the meadow behind the schoolhouse. Hayes continued his daily visits, sometimes joining their nature walks and entertaining the children with tales of animals he'd encountered in his travels. He had a way with the youngsters, patient and respectful even with the most rambunctious boys. "You'd make a fine teacher yourself," Emma observed one afternoon as they watched the children file back into the schoolhouse. Hayes chuckled. "I don't have your patience, Emma, or your learning, but I do enjoy seeing them discover the world." "Is that why you became a lawman?" she asked. "To protect that discovery." Hayes was silent for a moment, his expression thoughtful. "Partly," he admitted. "I wanted to make places safe for ordinary folks, but if I'm honest, I was also running from something." Emma's curiosity was piqued. "What were you running from?" "My father's legacy," Hayes said quietly. "He was a gunfighter, not the heroic kind from dime novels, the real kind. Dangerous, violent. He died in a saloon when I was 14, shot over a card game." His jaw tightened. "I swore I'd never become him." Emma touched his arm gently. "You haven't." "You're nothing like that, Hayes." He covered her hand with his own. "Some days I'm not so sure. The capacity for violence, it lives in all of us. The badge gives it purpose and boundaries, but it's still there." "It's what we choose to do that defines us," Emma insisted, "not what we're capable of." Hayes studied her face. "Is that why you left Boston, to choose a different path?" Emma withdrew her hand, the familiar wariness returning. "Perhaps," Hayes sighed. "I'm sorry, I promise not to pry." "It's all right," Emma said after a moment. "It's just my past is complicated and painful. I'd rather focus on the present." "Fair enough," Hayes agreed. "Speaking of the present, I've been meaning to ask if you'd care to join me for supper at the hotel tomorrow evening. They've got a new cook from New Orleans who supposedly makes a fine gumbo." Emma blinked in surprise. Their walks had become a comfortable routine, but a formal supper invitation was something else entirely. It was public, intentional. It announced to the town that they were. "What exactly?" That's very kind, but I don't think. Just supper," Hayes said gently. "Between friends." "Nothing more unless you wish it." Emma looked into his earnest face and found herself nodding. "All right, supper between friends." Hayes's smile was brilliant. "I'll call for you at 6. That night, Emma lay awake long after she should have been sleeping. Xavier had worked his way past her defenses with his quiet strength and unexpected gentleness. She found herself thinking of him at odd moments, wondering what he would say about a passage in her book, how he would handle a difficult student, whether he was eating properly at Mrs. Holloway's boarding house. It was dangerous, this growing attachment. If her father ever sent men to Silver Peak, Hayes would be duty-bound as marshal to assist them. Yet she couldn't bring herself to pull away, not when his presence had brought such unexpected joy to her life. The next evening, Emma changed her dress 3 times before settling on a blue silk she had brought from Boston but rarely wore. It was more formal than anything typically seen in Silver Peak, but it brought out the color of her eyes and fit her perfectly. She pinned her hair up with trembling fingers, securing it with her mother's pearl combs. At precisely 6 o'clock, a knock sounded at her door. Hayes stood on her porch, freshly shaved and wearing a clean shirt under his vest. He held a small nosegay of late wildflowers. "You look magnificent," he said, his voice slightly hoarse. Emma felt a blush rise to her cheeks. "Thank you. These are lovely," she added, accepting the flowers. Hayes offered his arm, and they walked the short distance to the Silver Peak Hotel. Several townspeople nodded greetings as they passed, some with knowing smiles that made Emma's blush deepen. The hotel dining room had been arranged with small tables covered in white cloths. A vase of dried autumn flowers adorned each one, along with proper silverware, a rarity in Silver Peak. The proprietor, Mr. Simmons, seated them at a corner table with a view of the street. "Special occasion, Marshal?" he asked with a wink. "Just enjoying the company of a lovely lady," Hayes replied smoothly, holding Emma's chair. They ordered the much-discussed gumbo, which proved to be as delicious as rumored. Conversation flowed easily between them, touching on books, childhood memories, and Hayes's adventures in law enforcement. "What made you accept the post in Silver Peak?" Emma asked as they lingered over coffee and apple pie. "It must seem very quiet after tracking outlaws in Colorado." Hayes considered her question. "Quiet appealed to me. I've seen enough violence to last several lifetimes." He took a sip of coffee. "And if I'm being completely honest, I was looking for somewhere to put down roots. A man gets tired of riding alone." The implication in his words hung between them. Emma traced the rim of her coffee cup, uncertain how to respond. "What about you?" Hayes asked. "Do you see yourself staying in Silver Peak?" "I've been happy here," Emma said carefully. "The people have been kind and I love my students." "But," Hayes prompted, Emma sighed, "but I've never allowed myself to think too far ahead. It didn't seem practical." "Because of whatever you left behind in Boston," Hayes said, not a question. Emma nodded, unable to meet his eyes. Hayes reached across the table and took her hand. "Emma, I don't know what or who you're running from, and I won't ask again. But I want you to know that as long as I'm marshal in Silver Peak, you're safe here." Emma looked up, startled by the intensity in his voice. "You can't promise that." "I can and I do," Hayes insisted. "Whatever it is, whoever it is, they'd have to go through me first." The conviction in his blue eyes made Emma's throat tighten. No one had offered to protect her before. She had been alone for so long, fighting her own battles, watching her own back. The thought of sharing that burden was both terrifying and tempting. "Thank you," she whispered. Hayes squeezed her hand gently before releasing it. "Now, I believe I was promised there would be dancing after supper. The fiddler should be starting soon in the hotel parlor." The evening stretched long and sweet. Hayes proved once again to be an excellent dancer, guiding Emma through waltzes and reels with easy confidence. When they finally walked home under a canopy of stars, Emma felt lighter than she had in years. At her door, Hayes removed his hat, his expression suddenly uncertain. "I had a wonderful time tonight, Emma." "As did I," she admitted, knowing it was true. Hayes stepped closer, his eyes asking a question. When Emma didn't back away, he bent slowly and brushed his lips against hers, a feather-light touch that sent warmth coursing through her entire body. "Good night, Emma Hawkins," he murmured, stepping back. "Good night, Hayes," she replied, her voice hardly more than a whisper. She watched him walk away, touching her fingers to her lips where the warmth of his kiss lingered. In that moment, Emma knew she was in grave danger not from her past, but from her heart. The next weeks passed in a blur of crisp autumn days and increasingly cold nights. Emma and Hayes fell into a new routine that included regular suppers at the hotel, long walks on Sunday afternoons, and the occasional stolen kiss in the shadows of her porch. Emma found herself smiling more, laughing easily at Hayes's wry observations and delighting in the small gifts. He brought her a ribbon for her hair, a book of poetry he'd ordered from Denver, a carved wooden box he'd made himself for her desk. Yet even as happiness bloomed between them, a shadow loomed. Emma knew she could not continue this courtship, for that was what it had become, without revealing the truth about her past. Hayes deserved to know what he was risking by aligning himself with her. The opportunity came on a snowy November afternoon. School had been dismissed early due to the weather, and Hayes had arrived to escort Emma home through the thickening flakes. They reached her cabin just as the storm intensified, wind howling around the eaves. "You shouldn't try to make it back to town in this," Emma said, stoking her small stove to build up the heat. "It's turning into a proper blizzard." Hayes stood awkwardly just inside the door, snow melting from his hat and coat. "I don't want to compromise your reputation, Emma." She smiled at his consideration. "I think my reputation can withstand the town knowing you took shelter from a blizzard. Besides, Mrs. Holloway can see my front door from her window. She'll vouch for your honorable intentions." Hayes chuckled, removing his wet outer garments and hanging them near the stove. "That woman misses nothing." Emma busied herself making coffee, acutely aware of Hayes's presence in her small living space. He examined her bookshelves respectfully, asking permission before removing a volume. "You have quite a collection," he observed. "Some of these editions look valuable." Emma handed him a steaming cup. "They were my mother's, the only things I brought with me from Boston." Hayes accepted the coffee, his fingers brushing hers. "Thank you for trusting me enough to share your home." Something in his gentle tone broke through Emma's final defenses. She sat in the chair opposite him, hands wrapped around her own cup for warmth. "Hayes, there's something I need to tell you about Boston, about why I left." He set down his book, giving her his full attention. "I'm listening." Emma took a deep breath. "My father is Richard Hawkins, owner of the largest shipping company in New England. My mother died when I was 16, and after that, father became controlling. He arranged a marriage for me to one of his business associates, a man nearly 50 years old who had already buried 2 wives. Hayes's expression darkened, but he remained silent, allowing her to continue. "I refused," Emma said, the old anger rising in her throat. "Father locked me in my room for 2 weeks, allowing only the housekeeper to bring meals. He said I would remain there until I agreed to the marriage." Her hands trembled on her cup. "So I climbed out the window one night. I had saved some money my mother had left me, hidden in my books. I cut my hair, dressed as a boy, and took the train west." "Brave," Hayes murmured, "and resourceful." Emma shook her head. "I was terrified. For months I looked over my shoulder constantly, expecting to see my father's men. He has connections everywhere, Hayes, powerful friends. I changed my name several times before I reached Montana." "Hawkins isn't your real name?" Hayes asked, surprised. It's my mother's family name. I thought it would be safer than using father's name, which everyone in banking circles would recognize." Emma set down her cup. "My father doesn't give up what he considers his property, Hayes. If he ever discovers where I am, he'll send men to bring me back, or come himself." Hayes was quiet for a long moment, processing her story. Has there been any indication he's looking for you? Any strangers asking questions about you? Not that I'm aware of, Emma admitted, but that doesn't mean he's given up. And if he does find you, what then? Emma met his gaze directly. I'll run again, further this time, perhaps to California or even abroad. Hayes leaned forward, his face intent. Or you could stay and fight. You're not 16 anymore, Emma. You're a grown woman with rights. He can't force you to marry anyone. You don't understand, Emma said, frustration coloring her voice. My father doesn't recognize boundaries or laws that interfere with what he wants. He's had men beaten for crossing him in business. He once bribed a judge to rule in his favor during a dispute over shipping routes. Then he hasn't met the right lawman, Hayes said quietly. I meant what I said before, Emma. No one is taking you anywhere against your will while I'm Marshal of Silver Peak. Emma felt tears threatening. I can't ask you to risk yourself for me. You didn't ask. I'm offering. Hayes moved to kneel beside her chair, taking her hands in his. Emma, I care for you, more than I've ever cared for anyone. If your father or his men show up in my town, they'll answer to me, and I promise you they won't like the conversation. A tear slipped down Emma's cheek. Why would you do this? Risk everything for someone you've known barely 2 months. Hayes reached up to brush away her tear. Because in those 2 months, you've become the most important person in my life. Because when I'm with you, I feel like the man I've always wanted to be. His voice dropped to a whisper. Because I love you, Emma Hawkins. Emma's heart seemed to stop. Hayes, you don't have to say anything, he assured her quickly. I know it's soon. I know you have every reason to be cautious, but I needed you to hear it at least once so you understand what's at stake for me. The storm howled outside, but inside Emma's small cabin, a different kind of tempest raged, hope battling fear, longing wrestling with caution. Hayes Xavier loved her. And God help her, she loved him too, had loved him perhaps since that day at the Wilson farm when he'd carved toys for frightened children while their mother struggled to bring new life into the world. I don't know what to say, she admitted finally. Hayes smiled, though his eyes remained serious. Say you'll think about staying, even if your father finds you. Say you'll let me stand beside you. Emma swallowed hard. I'll think about it. It was all she could promise, but it seemed to be enough for Hayes. He stood, pulling her gently to her feet. That's all I ask. He tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. For now. Then he kissed her, not the gentle brushes of lips they had shared before, but a kiss filled with promise and protection and something deeper that made Emma's knees weaken. She found herself responding with equal fervor, her hands sliding up to his shoulders, feeling the solid strength of him beneath her palms. When they finally broke apart, both breathing heavily, Hayes rested his forehead against hers. I should check on the weather, he said, his voice rough. Emma nodded, not trusting herself to speak. She watched as he moved to the window, pushing the curtain aside to peer into the swirling white. Storm's letting up, he reported. I should be able to make it back to town. Part of Emma wanted to ask him to stay, propriety be damned. But she knew it would be a mistake. They both needed time to think about what had been revealed, her secrets, his declaration. Be careful, she said instead, helping him into his coat. The drifts can be deceptive. Hayes buttoned his coat, then captured her hands again. I meant every word, Emma. I love you, and I'll protect you, whatever comes. He kissed her once more, briefly but tenderly, then settled his hat on his head and ventured out into the snowy evening. Emma watched from her window until his tall figure disappeared into the whiteness, her heart full and frightened all at once. The weeks leading up to Christmas were busy in Silver Peak. Emma's students prepared for their holiday recitation. Merchants decorated their storefronts with pine boughs and red ribbons, and the Ladies' Aid Society organized a community feast to be held at the church on Christmas Eve. Through it all, Hayes remained a steady presence at Emma's side. Though she had not yet found the courage to return his declaration of love, their relationship deepened with each passing day. The town had accepted them as a couple, with several of the older ladies dropping hints about wedding bells in the spring. Emma allowed herself to imagine such a future, despite the shadow of her father that still loomed in her thoughts. Hayes had taken her confession in stride, his determination to protect her never wavering. Could she truly build a life here, put down permanent roots and trust that she was finally free? One afternoon in mid-December, Emma was helping her students decorate the schoolhouse when a commotion outside drew her attention. A group of men on horseback had ridden into town, not cowboys or local ranchers, but well-dressed Eastern men, their fine coats and polished boots marking them as out of place in Silver Peak. Emma's blood ran cold. She counted 5 of them, led by a tall man with silver hair and a bearing that commanded attention even from a distance. Though she couldn't make out his face clearly, she knew with sickening certainty who it was. Richard Hawkins had found his daughter. "Children," Emma said, fighting to keep her voice steady, "continue with the decorations. I need to step out for a moment." She grabbed her shawl and hurried outside, her mind racing. She needed to reach Hayes before her father found her. The marshal's office was across the square, but the riders were headed in that direction. She would have to circle around behind the buildings. Emma slipped into the alley beside the schoolhouse, moving as quickly as she dared through the snow. She had nearly reached the back of the marshal's office when a voice stopped her in her tracks. "Emmeline, how very disappointing to find you like this." She turned slowly to face her father. He looked older than she remembered, deep lines etched around his mouth and eyes, but his expression was as cold and unyielding as ever. "Father," she acknowledged, lifting her chin. "How did you find me?" Richard Hawkins stepped closer, his expensive boots crunching in the snow. "Did you really think you could hide forever? That I wouldn't use every resource at my disposal to locate my own daughter? I'm not your property," Emma said, her voice stronger than she felt. "I have a life here, a good life." "A life," her father scoffed. "Teaching grubby children in a backwater town, living in a shack hardly better than a slave's quarters. You were raised for better things, Emmeline." "My name is Emma now," she corrected him, "and I decide what better means for me." Richard's face hardened. "Your willfulness has gone on long enough. I've made arrangements for our return to Boston. The train leaves from Helena tomorrow morning." "I'm not going anywhere with you," Emma stated firmly, though fear clawed at her throat. "You have no choice," her father replied. "I've spoken with the local law enforcement. He understands a father's right to claim his wayward daughter." Emma felt as though the ground had dropped from beneath her feet. "Hayes would never. Marshal Xavier has been most accommodating," Richard cut her off. "Especially after I explained the reward for your safe return." "You're lying," Emma whispered, but doubt crept into her mind. Could Hayes have betrayed her? Had his declarations of love and protection been nothing but empty words? "Come along, Emmeline," Richard said, reaching for her arm. "Don't make a scene. The lady isn't going anywhere she doesn't wish to go." Hayes's voice cut through the alley, calm and deadly serious. He stood a few paces away, his hand resting on his holster, his blue eyes hard as flint. Relief flooded through Emma. "Hayes." Richard turned to face the marshal, his expression contemptuous. "This is a family matter, Marshal. I believe we've already discussed the situation." "We discussed nothing," Hayes replied evenly. "Your men spoke to my deputy, not to me. And regardless of what they told him, no one is taking Miss Hawkins against her will." "She is my daughter," Richard snapped. "Under the law, she is a grown woman," Hayes interrupted, "free to make her own choices, and from what I can see, she's chosen not to go with you." Emma moved to stand beside Hayes, drawing strength from his presence. "Father, please, go back to Boston. I'm not the daughter you want me to be. I never will be." Richard's face flushed with anger. "You ungrateful girl. After everything I've provided for you, you provided a cage," Emma said, her voice steady despite her racing heart. "I chose freedom instead." For a long moment, Richard stared at his daughter, seeming to truly see her for the first time. Then his expression closed, becoming the impassive mask she remembered from her childhood. "My men are watching the town," he said coldly. "If you think your pet lawman can stand against all of us, you're even more naive than I thought." Hayes smiled, though there was no humor in it. "Your men have already been introduced to our town jail, Mr. Hawkins. It seems they made the mistake of threatening my deputy." Richard's head snapped up. "What? Silver Peak may be small, but we look after our own," Hayes continued. "And Emma is one of ours now." As if to emphasize his point, a group of townspeople had gathered at the entrance to the alley. Walter Jenkins with his father's shotgun, Dr. Green, the blacksmith with his massive arms crossed over his chest, and several others, all watching with grim determination. Richard Hawkins looked from the gathered townspeople to his daughter's resolute face, and something in his expression changed, not softening exactly, but recognizing defeat. "So be it," he said finally. "Live your frontier life if it pleases you, Emmeline. But don't come crying to me when you've tired of the dirt and deprivation." "I won't," Emma assured him. "Goodbye, Father." Richard turned without another word and stalked away, his rigid posture the only sign of his fury. Emma watched him go, a strange mixture of sadness and liberation washing over her. It was really over. The shadow that had haunted her for 3 years had finally been confronted and banished. She became aware of Hayes's hand on her shoulder, warm and reassuring. "Are you all right?" he asked quietly. Emma nodded, tears threatening despite her relief. "Thank you for standing with me." Hayes turned her gently to face him. "Always," he promised. Then, mindless of their audience, he kissed her, a brief but tender affirmation. When they broke apart, Emma noticed the townspeople were dispersing, giving them privacy while still keeping a watchful eye on Richard Hawkins as he mounted his horse at the edge of town. "I should get back to my students," Emma said, suddenly remembering the children waiting in the schoolhouse. Hayes nodded. "I'll make sure your father and his men leave town. Meet me at the hotel for supper." "Yes," Emma agreed. She started to turn away, then stopped. "Hayes, I love you too." The words came easily now, as natural as breathing. "I should have said it before." Hayes's smile was like sunrise after the longest night. Worth waiting to hear. Christmas Eve arrived with a fresh blanket of snow and a sense of peace Emma had never known. Her father and his men had departed on the eastbound train, and though Emma harbored no illusions that Richard Hawkins had accepted her decision, the immediate threat had passed. The church was packed for the community feast and the children's recitation. Emma sat proudly as her students performed the Christmas story and recited the poems they had practiced so diligently. Hayes sat beside her, his arm just touching hers, a solid presence she had come to rely on. After the feast, as families began to drift homeward through the snowy night, Hayes drew Emma aside. "Walk with me," he asked, his expression uncharacteristically nervous. Emma nodded, curious. They stepped out into the crisp night air, the stars brilliant overhead in the clear sky. Hayes led her toward the town square, where a massive pine tree had been decorated with paper stars and candles. In the stillness of Christmas Eve, with the town blanketed in white, it was almost magical. "I have something for you," Hayes said, reaching into his coat pocket. "A Christmas gift." He handed her a small package wrapped in brown paper and tied with a red ribbon. Emma untied it carefully, aware of Hayes watching her intently. Inside was a small wooden box, intricately carved with wildflowers and vines. When she opened it, she gasped. Nestled on a bed of velvet was a ring, a simple gold band set with a small but perfect diamond. Hayes, she whispered, her heart racing. He took her hands in his. Emma Hawkins, I know we haven't known each other long by most standards, but in these months you've become everything to me. Your courage, your kindness, your fierce, independent spirit, I love all of it. I love all of you. He took a deep breath. I'm asking if you'll make a permanent home here in Silver Peak, as my wife. Emma looked from the ring to Hayes's hopeful face, and all her doubts and fears seemed to melt away like snow in sunshine. This was what she wanted, this man, this town, this life she had built for herself. Yes, she said, her voice clear in the winter night. Yes, I'll marry you, Hayes Xavier. Hayes's face lit with joy as he took the ring and slipped it onto her finger. It fit perfectly, catching the starlight as Emma raised her hand to admire it. Merry Christmas, Emma, Hayes murmured, drawing her into his arms. Merry Christmas, she replied, tilting her face up for his kiss. They were married on the first day of spring, with the entire town in attendance. The schoolchildren scattered wildflower petals in Emma's path as she walked to meet Hayes at the altar, her green silk dress, the same one she had worn on their first proper evening together, complementing the fresh growth all around them. Mrs. Holloway cried openly throughout the ceremony, while Mr. Jenkins beamed with approval. Dr. Green served as Hayes's best man, and Clara Robinson stood beside Emma as her maid of honor. The reception lasted well into the evening, with dancing and feasting and so much goodwill that Emma felt almost overwhelmed by it. Silver Peak had truly become her home, these people her family in all the ways that mattered. When the celebration finally wound down, Hayes led his new wife to the small house he had purchased at the edge of town, close enough for Emma to walk to the schoolhouse each day, but with enough land for a garden and perhaps someday a place for children to play. Welcome home, Mrs. Xavier, Hayes said as he carried her over the threshold. Emma looked around the cozy space, noting the bookshelves he had built for her collection, the rocking chair by the fireplace, the fresh curtains Mrs. Holloway had helped her sew. It was perfect. I never thought I would have this, she admitted, turning in Hayes's arms to face him. A real home, a husband I love, safety. You deserve all of it and more, Hayes told her, brushing a strand of hair from her face. And I plan to spend the rest of my life making sure you have it. As night fell, they shared whispered dreams of their future together, children they might have, places they might visit, the life they would build side by side. Emma felt herself growing drowsy in the circle of Hayes's arms, content in a way she had never imagined possible. Just as she was drifting toward sleep, Hayes's voice came soft against her hair. I love you, Emma Xavier, he whispered, more than I'll ever be able to tell you. Emma, already half asleep, smiled against his chest. She thought she had responded, but later realized she had been too far gone in slumber to form the words. It didn't matter. Hayes had seen her smile, felt her nestle closer in his embrace. He had whispered those words not expecting an answer, but simply because his heart was too full to contain them. And every night thereafter, long after Emma had fallen asleep in his arms, Hayes would whisper those same words, a promise, a prayer, a reminder of the day a Boston lady and a Western lawman had found each other against all odds in a small town called Silver Peak. In the years that followed, Emma and Hayes built the life they had dreamed of that first night. Emma continued teaching at the schoolhouse, eventually training a young woman from Helena to assist her when their first child, a son they named William, was born. Hayes served as Marshal of Silver Peak with distinction, earning a reputation throughout the territory for his fair-minded justice. When Montana achieved statehood in 1889, the governor offered him a position as a circuit judge, which allowed him to stay based in Silver Peak while traveling to hear cases in surrounding counties. Their family grew to include a daughter, Catherine, who inherited her mother's auburn hair and her father's blue eyes, and another son, Thomas, who showed an early aptitude for medicine that Dr. Green was eager to nurture. Each summer, they would take the children to Yellowstone or to the Great Plains to see the buffalo. Each winter, they would gather around their fireplace, reading stories and playing games while snow piled high outside their windows. And every night, without fail, Hayes would wait until Emma had fallen asleep in his arms to whisper those 3 words that had changed both their lives forever. Emma knew, of course. She had awakened once to hear him, had felt the gentle brush of his lips against her temple as he spoke. But she never let on, treasuring the knowledge that even in her sleep, she was loved completely. On their 30th anniversary, with their children grown and the first grandchild on the way, Emma finally revealed her secret. "I've always heard you," she told him as they sat on the porch of their home, watching the sunset paint the mountains in gold and purple. "Every night, all these years." Hayes looked startled, then smiled the same smile that had first won her heart in a dusty Montana street. "And here I thought I was being so careful not to wake you." Emma leaned against his shoulder, as comfortable after 3 decades as she had been that first night. "Some things are worth waking up for." Hayes chuckled, wrapping his arm around her. "If I'd known you were listening, I might have been more poetic." "I love you is all the poetry I've ever needed," Emma assured him. As the stars emerged in the darkening sky, Xavier looked at the life he and Emma had built together: the home, the family, the town that had grown and prospered around them, and felt the same wonder he had experienced the day she agreed to be his wife. "I love you, Emma Xavier," he said, not waiting for sleep this time. "And I love you," she replied, her voice as certain as the day she had first spoken those words in the snow beneath the Christmas tree. Always. In the end, it was that simple. A woman who had fled from a life she didn't want had found one she cherished. A man determined to escape his father's violent legacy had created one of justice and kindness. Together, they had turned Silver Peak from a refuge into a home not just for themselves, but for each other. And every night, until the end of their days, those whispered words remained their most treasured tradition, a reminder that some loves are worth risking everything for, even when you think they'll never be spoken aloud.